There we go. My headset broke on the way up here a while ago, so I'm going to try to stay right here this morning in front of this guy. All right. In 1957, in a garage in New Jersey, inventor Alfred Fielding and a Swiss chemist named Marc Chavanon were looking to create a new textured wallpaper. Apparently this was becoming the thing, and these two thought they might capitalize on this movement, and they could find some kind of cool texture to throw up on people's walls. So they ran through several quick ideas, but didn't find anything necessarily inspiring. And then on a whim, they used heat to seal two shower curtains together. And what came out, they thought, it's got a little texture. This could work. This might sell. So they ran around, they tossed it to a couple different places, but it never really caught on. But they thought they were onto something with this idea, so they pivoted a little bit, and they started marketing it as greenhouse insulation. So they tested it, put it up on some greenhouses. This gained a little traction, but testing proved that two shower curtains really doesn't do much to insulate something. So they didn't really get much happening there either. And they floundered around for a couple more years until 1961, and then all of a sudden things began to click. They had heard that IBM was calling people and searching for a way to package their new computers so that they could ship them without being damaged. Eureka, they thought. This is it. This is the chance they've been waiting for. Their sealed air blanket would be perfect for shipping fragile cargo. Up until this point, people were still using crumbled up newspapers to ship things, and while that did provide a little bit of padding, it also got ink everywhere and was kind of a mess to clean up. They took their invention to IBM, they wrapped a computer in it, they stuffed it in a box, and bubble wrap was born. The rest, they say, is history. It would go on to become our favorite packing material and our favorite thing to pop when you get something in the mail. There have been several times that we ordered what we thought would be hit toys for our children, and they spent the first hour popping the bubble wrap and leaving the toy on the floor. And you have been there too, right? I'm not going to lie, I popped a couple bubbles last week myself, right? They're so satisfying to pop, so satisfying to play with. In fact, they have made bubble wrap into keychains. You can carry a little piece of bubble wrap with you, apparently, and pop it on the go when you need to. Late January, I think it's the last Monday in January, this coming year will be January 30th, would be National Bubble Wrap Day. So if you're an enthusiast, be sure and mark it on your calendar. Actually, if you're an enthusiast, you already have it on your calendar. But hey, Bubble Wrap Day is coming. And the reputation of bubble wrap has reached almost mythical proportions. It has a cult following almost. And if you want something to survive, if you want something to be protected, wrap it in bubble wrap. You'll keep it nice and safe. We are going to wrap up, we'll get to Daniel chapter 12 today, the last chapter in Daniel. Next week, we will wrap up the whole series, and we'll talk about this big theme that I gave you for homework. And we'll put a bow on all of what we've looked at through the last several months, or a couple of months. But today, we will get to the last actual text. We'll be in Daniel chapter 12 today. By way of a brief recap, of course, Daniel has 12 chapters. The first 6 are about narrative history structure. They talk about these characters, these people, these heroes of ours, Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Their lives and their interactions with so many egotistical kings that seem to pop up in this time period, and how time and time again they rely on God's direction. They're kind of proven worthy in this situation. And then the last 6 chapters are more dreams and visions, in particular dreams that Daniel is having. In the first half, Daniel interprets dreams for others. In the second half, God is showing dreams and visions to him. And in those visions, we get this picture of this chaotic future that is coming for God's people. There will be time and time again, there will be king after king and nation after nation that's going to be warring over this part of the world, and God's people are going to be stuck kind of in the middle of it. But we are taught that the Ancient of Days is on the throne, and the Son of Man is coming. And today we'll get into Daniel chapter 12. So if you want to follow along, flip over there. We'll read through this together. And I think there may have been one chapter that was particularly long that we didn't get every word on. But by the end of today, we will have read almost every word of Daniel aloud in here, which is pretty fascinating, I think. So let's get through Daniel 12, and we'll get through our last big text, and then again kind of wrap up the series next week. We'll begin in verse 1 this morning. At that time, Michael, the great prince who protects your people, will arise. There will be a time of distress, such has not happened from the beginning of nations until then, but at that time your people, everyone whose name is found written in the book, will be delivered. Multitudes who sleep in the dust of the earth will awake, some to everlasting life, others to shame and everlasting contempt. At the very beginning, the very onset of this chapter, we are reintroduced to Michael. We heard that name a little bit earlier in the book of Daniel. Michael will become, especially in the intertestamental period, to be known as kind of Israel's guardian angel, the head angel among angels. We will even call him the archangel Michael. So Michael, we learn in Daniel chapter 12, is kind of the angel assigned, at least in this prophetic text, to Israel and to help protect Israel during this time. We have a reference to this book of life again here in these first few verses. Again, this is the idea that the Ancient of Days has the book in front of him. He knows what's going on. He sees what's happening. He's paying attention. He's not absent. And here we get to a really interesting discussion. I've mentioned several times so far that the book of Daniel lends itself to be interpreted in a lot of different ways. In particular, there are a lot of doomsday scenarios and future end-of-the-world calculations that come out of the book of Daniel. There's a lot of very symbolic language and even some numbers in there that people try to use to calculate the end of the world and when Jesus is coming back again and things like that. You'll notice, or at least I hope you've noticed, that so far what at least I think is the most appropriate interpretation of Daniel, given what we know and what's in the text and what style of writing it is that these types of things are talking about very real earthly existences, things that are going to happen in the future for the people of Daniel, but are in the past for us. But there is some discussion. Some people will interpret Daniel as prophecy for the far future, for the second coming of Jesus. And we really start to hear some of that language here in Daniel chapter 12. And so we want to ask ourselves, as we get to Daniel 12, have we shifted now, and are we talking about the end of the world? Are we talking about the apocalypse? Are we talking about the second coming of Jesus? Possibly, but not likely. And I'll tell you why, at least I believe that. Everything this far in the book of Daniel has been rooted, again, in things that for us are in the past, and I think at least pretty convincingly. You read about these beasts that will arise and what will happen to them, and we compare them with very specific things in history that match almost detail for detail what is prophesied here, in particular leading up to the reign of Antiochus IV. So far, all through the first 11 chapters, this has really been rooted in these, for us, historical events, for them, future events. And so it seems unlikely that all of a sudden in Daniel chapter 12, the dreams would start to shift all the way to the future without really any explanation of what's happening. So odds are this is still talking about this time period that we've been reading about. This end, as we're going to talk about, the end time would be the end of this prophetic era. And verse 2 in particular, and if we read it, you go, okay, now Jared, what about verse 2? Right. Let's read verse 2 again. Multitudes who sleep in the dust of the earth will awake, some to everlasting life and others to shame and everlasting contempt. This sounds to us like this is the end, this is heaven and hell, right? Possibly, but again, probably not. We know that through reading through the book of Daniel, that Daniel is very familiar with his fellow prophets. Daniel knows Jeremiah very intently. In fact, he's referred to things that have happened in Jeremiah's prophecy several times in his writing. Chapter 11 in particular is really rooted in Jeremiah. We didn't get to dig in that far because there was a lot that happened in chapter 11. But Daniel really knows his prophets. He knows what God has said about this time period and these people. And in chapter 12, we're going to learn that Daniel also really knows Ezekiel. Daniel really knows about the prophecy of Ezekiel. Ezekiel chapter 37, if you're not familiar, is the dry bones prophecy. We're not going to read it or go through it. We did a sermon on it around Halloween a few years ago, which was a lot of fun. So if you haven't read or you're not familiar with Ezekiel 37, I would challenge you to go read it this week. It's really fascinating. But this is the idea that Ezekiel prophesies that these dry bones will rise up out of the desert and that God will put flesh back on them and they will walk around. And you go, oh, that sounds really creepy. Well, yes, it does sound really creepy. But this is an image that Ezekiel is using to portray the rebirth of the nation of Israel. Ezekiel is saying, Israel is dead right now, they're buried. But the Lord will bring them, Israel, his chosen people, his nation, back to life. And so here in chapter 12, Daniel's going to take some of those same ideas, or in this vision, we're going to hear some of those same ideas of Ezekiel chapter 37, and we're going to talk about the multitudes rising up out of the dust. And really, this is the nation of Israel being resurrected again. Okay, but some will rise to shame and contempt, right? What about those people? What are we talking about there? Well, if you remember when we got into Antiochus IV, we talked about how when he came back from a losing battle, he was already mad, and he came back and noticed that the Israelites were fighting. He thought he was seeing an upcoming rebellion, and so this institutes the whole abomination that causes desolation. He takes it out on God's people, but really it was not a revolt. It was a schism within Israel itself. There were two groups. There were Torah loyalists, those who were committed to living out God's word as he'd asked them to. And then there was a portion of God's people who were Hellenists. They wanted to try to live both worlds, that they would hold on to Torah, but also welcome in the coming Greek philosophy and things like that. And so these two halves split apart, and they were actually fighting against each other. And so this vision refers to that schism, that some will arise, and they will be just fine. But others will rise to contempt, because they parted from the ways of the Lord. Now, before we go further and we finish the chapter, we've got this little brief introduction here that kind of sets the stage for where we're going to be. Before we go any further, let's talk about where we're going to go in the rest of this chapter. We've been calling this series Living with Lions, and hopefully you've been picking up on that metaphor a little bit. Excuse me. Of course, Daniel is thrown into a lion's den, and he lives, right? So that title is appropriate there. But also, God's people are being shown a future that is chaotic and violent, a future defined by empire after empire and king after king fighting with each other and warring with each other, devouring each other. God is trying to prepare his people to live with lions. And as we wrap up chapter 12, God is going to give Daniel, Israel, and I think us, some really good advice for how to live in a world when things are chaotic and crazy. Let's keep going in verse 4. But you, Daniel, roll up and seal the words of the scroll until the time of the end. Many will go here and there to increase knowledge. Here we have this phrase again. We read this a couple of chapters ago, where whoever's giving the vision, the angel, or maybe even the Spirit of God, says to Daniel, roll up this and seal it. Sometimes to us that implies the idea of secrecy. Hold it up and keep it secret. That's not the phrase here. The idea here is hold it safe. Keep it close, protect it. What we're hearing here is that times are going to get crazy. And God says, I want you to remember this vision. I want you to remember these words. I want you to keep them close to you and protect them. And this is the first step in living with lions. Hold on to the word. Hold on to the word. Keep a tight grip on these important words, the words of God. Use them to anchor yourself so that when the storm comes and it feels like the world is blowing us all sorts of ways, we can clutch to this one thing to keep us rooted where we should be. And then many will go here and there to increase knowledge. We want to talk about a prophetic text. I mean, a lot of crazy things have happened in this book that were prophesied for the future that came true. This might be one of the most prophetic ones. In times of chaos, people will go here and there to try to increase knowledge. Have we seen that in the last 5 years? Have we seen people going everywhere to find knowledge? Are we covered with conspiracy theories in the world around us? Everybody is an expert and everybody knows what's about to happen. In times of chaos, People who seem very sure of themselves will draw people, whether they're correct or not, whether they know what they're saying or not. And so God tells Daniel, hold these truths tightly. When things get chaotic, people will try to go everywhere to find solid ground. Hold on to these words. Keep them safe. Hold them with you. Remind our people to return to them. Step number 1 in living with lions is hold on to the word. Let's keep going. Verse 5. Then I, Daniel, looked, and there before me stood 2 others, one on this bank of the river and one on the opposite bank. One of them said to the man clothed in linen who was above the waters of the river, how long will it be before these astonishing things are fulfilled? The man clothed in linen who was above the waters of the river lifted his right hand and his left hand toward heaven, and I heard him swear by him who lives forever, saying, it will be for a time, times, and half a time. When the power of the holy people has been finally broken, all these things will be completed. So again, Daniel's here and has this vision of these people on opposite sides of this river where he's been for quite a while now. We have a reference again to this one that's in linen, who seems to be almost like the Spirit of God. And this person here, Daniel looks up and asks a question that I think we've all asked, right? Like, how long? When is this going to take place? And we have this phrase, again, we've heard from the book of Daniel before, a time, times, and half a time. Okay, people start to look at this and say, okay, well, now can we use some calculations? Can we figure out what we're talking about here? Yes and no, but probably not. I think the best interpretation of this time, times, and half a time is, again, it's specific enough to know that God knows. He's not winging it. God says there's a plan. I know exactly how long it's going to last. But it's vague enough for us to know that we don't. God knows. God knows exactly how long it's going to last. But for us, we look at that and go, I'm not exactly sure what that means. God says, exactly, I know. But you don't. Let's keep going. Verse 8. I heard, but I did not understand, so I asked my Lord, what will the outcome of this be? And he replied, go your way, Daniel, because the words are rolled up and sealed until the time of the end. You can almost hear Daniel's anguish in this question. Daniel says, how long? Like, when is this going to happen? And God says, a time, times, and half a time. And he goes, okay, well, that really wasn't that helpful. And so he replies again, my Lord, what will the outcome of this be? And how many times have I asked that question? God, how is this going to end up? I don't know where we're going. This looks scary, and I don't know what's going to happen. What is this going to be? What will this turn out to be? How is this going to go? And God's response is, go your way, Daniel. And that's step number 2 in living with lions. Let's not forget that at this point, much of Israel has returned to Jerusalem already, and Daniel is still living in Babylon. Daniel is living in the teeth of one of those lions, in this culture that has tried to root his culture out of him. And God looks at Daniel and says, go your way. What is he telling Daniel to do? What he's telling Daniel is, you know what to do. You know how to live. You know what I expect of you. You've been doing it here among these people. Keep doing it. Go your way. Live the way that you know how to live. It might be tempting for us as Christians to grant ourselves leeway in times of chaos, right? Well, sure, I'm supposed to love my enemies and pray for those who persecute me, but not them. Not right now. Like, God, don't you see what's happening in the world around us? Don't you see what these people are doing? Don't you see what those people are saying? I can't do that. Not now. That must be for another time. God looks at Daniel and says, go your way. You know how to live. You know what you've been called to do. That doesn't change in the lion's den. Just because you're in a lion's den doesn't mean you're exempt from what I've called you to be and who I've called you to be. Go your way. So number 1, hold on to the word. Number 2, go your way. Let's look at verse 10. Many will be purified, made spotless and refined, but the wicked will continue to be wicked. None of the wicked will understand, but those who are wise will understand. Step number 3 is realize that there are wicked people who are going to be wicked. It's going to happen. This is the world that we live in. You can almost just hear God in this text imploring Daniel to let it go. Now, are there times that we as God's people should intervene and bring people along? Absolutely. Jesus stood up on a mountain, and before he ascended, he looked at his disciples and he said, go and make more disciples. Absolutely, that is a charge that we are called to do. But there are times when, unfortunately, there are wicked people who are going to do wicked things. And God looks at Daniel and says, they're not going to get it. There's going to be wicked people, and they're not going to understand. That is part of the human nature. That is part of the world that we live in. And we can sit around and we can worry about it and we can stress about it and wring our hands and say, the world is just going down the tube, and what are we going to do about it, and where are we going to go? Or we can live out the calling of God in the world. We can go our way and live as voices of light and hope and truth. We can recognize that wicked people are going to do wicked things, but also offer the opportunity to see that there is an alternative, that there are good people who will do good things. There are wicked people who are going to do wicked things, but there is also God's people who are going to do good things in the world regardless. Let's keep going. Last couple verses. From the time that the daily sacrifice is abolished and the abomination that causes desolation is set up, there will be 1,290 days. Blessed is the one who waits for and reaches the end of the 1,335 days. As for you, go your way till the end. You will rest, and then at the end of the days, you will rise to receive your allotted inheritance. Now, this is where we start to put our little Blue's Clues detective hats on, because we read earlier that there would be a time, times, and half a time. Well, if we go time is 1, times plural is 2, and then half a time, that would be 3.5. And that might be 3.5 years. Well, then we fast forward to the end of Daniel, and we hear 1,290 days. Now, there are all kinds of calendars going on. We have lunar calendars, and we have solar calendars, and we have all that. But if you take 1,290 and you divide it by 365, you get 3.523, and we're really close to 3.5 years. And we go, oh, we found it, 3.5 years. And then the vision says, and blessed is the one who waits for and reaches the end of 1,335 days. Now, hold on a second. We just got the math lined up, and now we're going to throw in another number. And honestly, the best note that I have read, as I read a lot of people who tried to interpret these numbers, the most common explanation was, it could be 3.5 years, but this second number kind of throws us off, and we're not entirely sure. And it may be simply that the numbers have a symbolic significance that is now lost on us. And I think that's probably pretty true. But I also think the same thing applies to time, times, and half a time as that applies here. God knows exactly when it's going to be. We don't necessarily get to know. God's not clueless. God knows, but we don't get to know. And then God's going to finish this vision. He's going to finish Daniel's text right here. Go your way to the end. Again, you know how to live. Whether it's 1,290 days, 1,335 days, 70 years, 77 years, whatever it is, you know how I've called you to live in the world. Go be it. Go do it. Go your way to the end. I don't know about you, but as I studied this chapter in particular, I kind of felt this weight lift off my shoulders. We can spend so much time and effort and energy worrying and complaining about the state of the world. I've been on Facebook, okay? I've seen it. I know we can worry about the state that the world is in. We can wish for better times. We can spend all of our energy just complaining about what is happening. Even in the church. Why is the state of the church the way it is? And sometimes I start to trick myself into believing that for us as followers of Jesus that it should be better. Where is God amidst all this? If we're following God's word, shouldn't he be protecting us? Shouldn't he be looking out for us in the midst of all of this chaos? I almost wish that God would just wrap us up in bubble wrap and tuck us away. That we would be safe and secure. That we could be jostled around inside of some UPS truck somewhere, bouncing around wherever, and come out nice and safe, unawares of all of it, protected by God's cushion. But the more that we study Scripture, the more that we learn that that has never been the case. God is not interested in safely secluding his people in their own little utopian society unaware of what's happening in the rest of the world. God is not interested in bubble-wrapped Christians. God wants us in that world, holding on to the Word, going the way that He has taught us to go, and being voices of good against the wickedness that arises. The Ancient of Days is on the throne, the book of life is in front of Him, and the Son of Man is coming. And God says, you won't be devoured. But God called Daniel, God called Israel, and it sure seems like God is calling us to live with those lions. So this week, go find a piece of bubble wrap and pop one, and remind yourselves that we're not supposed to live in a bubble. We're supposed to be out in the world. And when things look scary, and when things look crazy, times and half a time, God knows exactly what He's doing. And He knows exactly when it will end. We just don't always get to. God will be there, and we will not be devoured. But sometimes we are called to live with lions. Let's stand together. If I can help you or pray for you this morning, I'd be happy to do that if you come find me down front. And Robert will lead us in one more song.